not really talking about anything too K-pop focused, but I know that most people come to my channel for the K-pop stuff. So I'm just going to talk about the two K-pop things that I feel like need to be talked about super quick. And then we're going to talk about bromance, because this is where I'm looking for audience participation, and I can't get that if I don't get to the point. So let's start with the first K-pop thing I think we need to talk about, and that is the fact that we recently celebrated the 10th anniversary of the Sewol ferry tragedy. I believe it is either the 9th or the 10th. I'm pretty sure it's the 10th, but I could be wrong. I needed to talk about it. And I needed to talk about it because this is one of those things where you really can tell who is second gen and who's not. Number one, if you're not a Korean citizen, like those of us outside of Korea will probably remember this event in context with K-pop, whereas people obviously in Korea, around Korea, will remember it for the tragedy that it was. And I, of course, remember the tragedy too. I think the most heartbreaking moments of that whole situation were the fact that the captain did not tell the children to evacuate the ship. They were instructed by the captain and their teachers to stay in their cabins while the captain and his crew evacuated the vessel. Can't get over that. Can't get over the heartbreaking videos that children took inside of the boat as it was filling with water. The voicemails and messages they were leaving for their family, telling them they were scared and they thought they were going to die. The empty classrooms showing all of the chairs where entire classrooms were practically wiped out. The graduation ceremony for the kids who never made it to graduation. The cafeteria wall full of the pictures of these children. The principal who killed themselves after the boat sank because they felt like they did something wrong and they caused these children to die. The fact that the president of South Korea at the time couldn't be arsed to go to the site once they heard this was happening because they were in the middle of, I think, a beauty appointment. Subsequently, that president did get ousted from office because she was taking the advice of a psychic over practical advice. And she was a Nepo baby. Her dad used to be president of South Korea, and then she got the job. Fuck that bitch. I say all that to say, it was a trying time for the people of the country. But for those of us who were K-pop fans, outside of the tragedy of, you know, obviously the loss of life and everything else, EXO was supposed to have a comeback. And I remember so many EXO-Ls that were waiting for Overdose being the bitterest bitches on the planet. I remember foreign fans saying, fuck that noise with them kids, the comeback's supposed to happen right now, what the fuck? To me, we talk about fan wars, stan wars, all this stuff. That is one moment from K-pop I will never forget, I will never forgive, because I remember thinking to myself, you bitches don't deserve air. For you to complain about the fact that Korean citizens would choose to postpone entertainment activity because there was a large-scale loss of life and the country needs a moment to mourn, fuck y'all. But yeah, I also think about the art that came after the Sewol ferry tragedy. I think about Red Velvet, even though one of these nights was not technically about the Sewol ferry tragedy, but like if you look at the video, it's really hard not to believe it has some connection. I think about Red Light by FX, which is absolutely about the Sewol ferry tragedy. I think about all of the artists who dedicated songs or shouted out to fans who lost their lives during this time. I think Zico actually attended the funeral for one of the children who died in the sinking of the ferry. Yeah, I think about just how heartbreaking that whole situation was, and those parents being so brave and ceaselessly asking for answers to this day, still asking for answers for what happened to their children, why the government was so fucking ineffective. why they couldn't be asked to like really look into things. And I don't think they ever got any money that could compensate them for the loss of their children, even though the ferry was run by a very large shipping company. I don't think that they were ever adequately compensated for their loss. But honestly, who can be adequately compensated for the loss of their child if we're just being honest with each other? But yeah, the anniversary of the Sewall Ferry tragedy was a couple of days ago, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned that because it was a time. It really was a time. I will be honest with you, that moment was the breaking point between people who were like fans of K-pop because they thought boys and girls were cute and they had crushes and an Asian kink, and the people who were actually interested in like what's going on in culture, what's happening in the country, how these are human beings just like the rest of us in the rest of the countries across the world, and wanting to know like what's the environment in Korea like. So I always think about that moment in K-pop history, and I always think about how, yeah, after that, definitely myself and a lot of other people who talk about K culture really started talking more about like the political aspect of things, and how Korea is not this fantasy land where everyone is super happy and everyone is super attractive, and it's a real place that has its own problems and it has its own things going on, and it needs people need to be respected for living a human experience no matter where they are on the planet. So I want to talk about that, number one. And just, again, rest in peace to these poor babies. I hope that wherever their spirits are, that they're finding comfort, or maybe they've had a chance to make arrangements to come back down. And if they have, I hope this life was better than the last. The second thing I want to talk about was visas. So if you're not aware, whenever a K-pop group comes to America to perform, they have to get a work visa because technically they're in America to make money. There are some times when you can avoid a work visa. For instance, like if you come to America and you're not doing a money making activity, for instance, if you come to America to talk to the UN, or you come to America to perform at a free festival where you're not getting paid to be there, no one's getting paid to be there, then those you don't have to have a work visa because there's no work kind of involved that generates income. But for anyone from any foreign country that comes into the United States, you have to have a work visa, which allows you to come here, make money, allows for some form of a taxing authority to happen so that America can feel like they're getting profit off of your appearance here, right? Well, it used to be that the work visas traditionally cost around $500 for people on an individual basis to come to America to perform for short-term work visas. That price has recently almost quadrupled. So we're talking like closer now to 1600, maybe a little bit over 1600 per person for a work visa to come to America from foreign countries. This means that, let's say Red Velvet decided they wanted to come to America and do a stage performance. Is every single member of Red Velvet paying their work visa price, plus any personal assistants they have, stage directors, costumers, makeup people, stage sound crew, all of those people also have to be paid per person around $1,600. So what used to be already a relatively larger expense per person, like just off the top, you gotta make sure you have $500 per person in order for them to be able to come to the US and work. And that's not even including maybe paying for hotel accommodations for individuals, plus maybe group hotel accommodations, food, transportation back and forth, all those expenses. Those are the expenses that are your baseline overhead expenses for any concert you're going to have. So when you triple or quadruple the cost per person just for them to be allowed to enter the country, not even including the way that transportation has cost more because of inflation, the way food costs more in America because of inflation, the way cars cost more, the way venues cost more, Ticketmaster fees, ticket issuing companies. If you're not using Ticketmaster, you might be using SeatGeek, Live Nation, Vivid Seats. All of these things are costing you money. But now just even the per person cost you money now. I think it's going to cause a lot of companies to really think hard and change their approach when it comes to touring the US. Because I'm thinking very specifically of Nugu groups, and I'm thinking of artists on labels who maybe aren't the most popular artists on their label who want to come to the United States to make a little bit of money. So I don't know if you watched my last live, but my last live I talked about the idea of Hybe having like a Hybe family tour. So if they had a Hybe family tour, what I had envisioned was, you've got BTS TXT, but you've also got In Hyphen, you've got Boys Next Door, you've got New Jeans, Illit, E Seraphim, From Nine, 17, like where you've got everybody. It's a big tour. And while right now I don't see that happening because TXT's concert ticket sales are fairly healthy. Those prices are insane, but they're fairly healthy sales. BTS obviously sells out on their own. 17 obviously does very well on their own. So when I made that video, this didn't really seem like a reality, except for maybe on the girl side of things. But now that we're talking per person expenses, I really and truly believe that this could be the incentive to get people to put on K-pop tickets rather than individual groups. Because, okay, let's just say only one wants to come to the United States and make a little bit of money. And they have to bring an interpreter. They have to bring managers. They have to bring scheduling people. They have to bring their costume, their wardrobe, all that stuff. They're severely cutting into their profit margin by doing this. And that's not even including the cost of freight for bringing the supplies for them to put on their show. But you know how you can save a little bit of money? If you can hire people who can run a show that services multiple individuals. If you can hire maybe 3 costumers that are handling 5 groups. If you can handle a stage manager who's handling a show rather than a single artist. And so I think this could encourage them to go on tour with a group from another label. And maybe they could base the ticket on album sales or senior status of the group, however it goes, just to make sure that everybody's equitable. But Kiss of Life, I wouldn't expect Kiss of Life to come to the United States by themselves, but I could see Kiss of Life sharing a ticket with Billy and Dreamcatcher. They're wildly different, but I still feel like that's a show that a lot of different people would be willing to pay for. And so that's my hope, is that maybe this will encourage people to decide to kind of come together and do package concerts more often. But also, because it costs so much, maybe people will take a little bit more care and do a little bit more planning before they come to the US. Maybe not just schedule a tour 2 weeks before the tickets go on sale and 3 weeks before the first show begins. Maybe because you know how much it's going to cost you in overhead and you're already anticipating a huge spike in those costs increase, maybe you want to give people a little bit more time to buy their ticket. Maybe you want to do a little bit more market research and make sure you're holding these shows in the right places, or at least giving people time to work out how to get from podunk nowhere to Dallas, Chicago, Los Angeles, DC, Atlanta, the places where y'all like to go. So yeah, I'm hoping that it can be made into a good thing, even though right now it's an expensive thing. But yeah, those are my hopes going forward, and those were the 2 K-pop things I wanted to talk about. Also, Park Bodam, who was a singer who passed away. I want to say she passed away last week. It has come out that she died of a heart attack, and I'm only mentioning it because apparently when the news first came out that she passed away, because she was so incredibly young, a lot of people were chalking it up to some form of self-harm, and it wasn't. She just had an unfortunate health issue, and I think we really need to be careful. I understand that South Korea is not the biggest proponent of mental health services. They're working on it, but in the past has not been well addressed. And so a lot of us, when we hear of a young person who had any kind of public facing status passing away in South Korea, we tend to think this could be self harm. But that's not always so. You know, young people die in car accidents, young people die from health reasons, young people die from misadventure, if you know what I mean. There's a lot of things that can happen to a young person in this lifetime. It doesn't always mean that they took their own life. And so I'm just, I feel for her family, because the last thing they want to do is expose, you know, their most private, horrifying nightmare to the public and have to discuss these things when they're busy trying to figure out life without this person that they love. But again, if you have a public face, then you don't get privacy even in death. So wanted to make sure I made mention of that. Now that I've talked about everything K-pop related, if you're not here to talk about what I talk about in the title, I'd understand if you don't want to stay, but I have to talk about this. So I sometimes come on my channel and I talk about boys love. Mostly I talk about Thai boys love, but I do talk about Taiwanese boys love. I talk about Korean boys love. I talk about a lot of boys love shows as I watch them. And if you weren't aware, Mason and myself used to do a BL show together, which you can find all of our old episodes on his channel. It's BL Kiki, so it's BLKIKI. If you look that up, you'll see where we talked about SOTUS, we talked about Barn Type, we talked about a lot of different shows. Anyway, we don't do that show together anymore. Schedule wise, it just didn't work out for us. We had gotten from weekly to bi-weekly to just not being able to make it happen. But I still watch BL because I love BL. It's a fun genre for me. And I know as a straight woman that people don't really want to hear my opinion when it comes to talking about gay stuff. I get it. Even as being the ally I believe I am, sometimes I do get nervous talking about gay stuff because I don't want to be offensive to anybody. But I always try to keep a reasonable head on my shoulders, and I'm fortunate enough to have gay people, queer people in my life to check me when they find that I'm speaking out of pocket. So I've been able to enjoy BL content, and I think I've been very reasonable about my expectations of what that content should have. Now, one area of content that I really haven't talked about at all on my channels is bromance. And that's because, honestly, when I first started watching BLs, I felt like bromance was a cop-out. I'm not gonna lie. I'm one of those people that I'm like, you know, why not just take it there? What's all this hemming and hawing and highly suggesting but not really saying, and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And I think that my negative first impressions of bromance came from the show Addicted Heroin. So, when I first started watching BL, I started watching it on Viki. And the first BL that I watched that wasn't Thai BL was a show called Addicted Heroin. It was a Chinese show. It is on Viki right now if you wanted to watch it. And it was about these two guys who go to school together, and unbeknownst to one of them, they are stepbrothers. You might be asking yourself, how is it unbeknownst to one of them? Well, one of them, his dad is rich. His dad married a new woman, and he doesn't like this new woman. So he runs away from home, ends up in this school, and then realizes that this new woman that married his dad, her son goes to this school. So when he's initially there, he's terrorizing this kid because he's mad because he hates his kid's mom for marrying his dad. And his mother had passed away. So it wasn't that his parents divorced, his mother had passed away. Anyway, over time, he begins to see that this kid he's torturing is actually a really good kid, not a bad guy, that his mother basically abandoned him, so he really doesn't benefit from his mom being married to this rich guy because his mother had never really been there for him in his life anyway. And they start to develop a friendship. But slowly, the rich kid starts to want more than just straight up friendship. He starts to have a love relationship with this guy. And I don't want to say rapey is the word. It can be a little aggressive at times. That's what I want to say. But overall, it was an interesting little storyline. I appreciate it because I really didn't know much about Chinese school culture and like the way that they wear uniforms and stuff like that. So I was interested in watching it because it was another aspect of Asian life that I just really wasn't aware of. Anyway, the show ends on a complete cliffhanger. Like literally, the show it shows the both of them being whisked away to go live with the rich dad, and then that's it. You don't know what happens. You just don't know anything that's going on. Well, I of course was super confused, and I went online to like find out more information. Like, why would this show end like this? This doesn't make any sense. Well, it turns out the Chinese government. That's the answer to that question. The Chinese government. The Chinese government is not really too keen on the gay stuff. They don't support it. They don't like to see it supported in their media. They don't like it in real life that much either. And the two actors who did this show, I guess, crossed a line in terms of what's socially acceptable for the Chinese government's media, and they cut the show off. They also banned these two individuals from being in the same vicinity of each other. To this day, I don't think those two have ever taken a picture together, ever, the two lead actors. And so after that time, even though that kind of a show wasn't really airing on Chinese television, there were still tons of fangirls writing BL fanfic. And China tends to have a lot of like fantasy television, like in terms of stuff that's kind of based in Chinese folklore or has historical Chinese dressing, but is also like fantastical, people with superpowers, time travel, gods and goddesses involved, stuff like that, right? And so a lot of the fanfic writers and people just writing fiction full stop would use these elements of like fantasy Chinese storytelling, but they would tell a gay story when they're telling this, right? And some of these stories were like really popular. And so what got me back into wanting to hear more about BL bromance in China was the release of the show The Untamed. Now, I only heard about this show once the show was finished airing because apparently it was a massive, massive deal in China. People raved over it. It escaped just China and became this huge deal worldwide. A lot of people that I know who give a fuck about BL watch The Untamed. And I wanted to watch it, but I will tell you what stopped me from watching it. It had 50 episodes on Viki, and each episode was like 40 plus minutes. And I'm like, maybe that's too much time to spend on television. For me personally, it was too much time to spend on television. But the other thing that really interested me about The Untamed was the fact that Ebo from Unique was on the show. And I remember Unique from Woo, Woo, Woo. I remember that song very, very well. And apparently his appearance on that show was like the third of his really high profile television appearances that he had been doing. Like he had gotten a variety show, he was on a dancing show, and then he did this. And so right now as we speak, he is a massive, massive deal in China. Also his co-star, who was in another boy band that was like one of those produce style shows, he's also a massive deal. And things got so fucking out of control with these two and their fandom that at one point I think it got AO3 banned. Like something happened like in fanfic world where like their fanfics were banned, and these two basically I don't think they ever hang out with each other anymore either because the fans were nuts and bananas, and also they're trying to make sure the Chinese government doesn't come down on their necks the way they did previous actors, right? But because this show was so popular, there have been quite a few bromance shows that have been made in China to varying levels of success. Some have been super successful, some have had controversy before they even had the chance to get off the ground. One actor in particular, I think he made a visit to Japan and was photographed at some site that greatly offended the Chinese people because of Japan's role in the occupation of China during World War II, and so I think that show kind of dissolved. They've had shows that will air and then get taken off of the air and scrubbed from the internet after they have broadcast. Like a lot of weird shit goes on, right? So I was prepared to completely just ignore bromance because this is too many complications for me. This is too many hoops to jump through, too many hurdles to get over. I just really wasn't trying to put in that kind of effort to watch television. Until Stay With Me. So remember I was telling you about Addicted Heroin and how the show just was abrupt, cut off, and never really knew what happened. Well, apparently Stay With Me was the Chinese bromance redo of Addicted Heroin. It's set in the same time period as Addicted Heroin, so it wasn't updated for modern tastes, but it is the same story based on the novel, book,